Hello and welcome to Analysis on TV 360 Nigeria. I am Oyin Adekunle and Happy New Year. Now, Nigeria went through a rough patch in 2020. It was the year of the coronavirus pandemic, the NSAS protests, political debacle, recession, and of course not forgetting all the security challenges the nation had to grapple with in that year. Finally, the year is over, and for many Nigerians, the new year 2021 offers a fresh start despite the second wave of the coronavirus pandemic currently ravaging the world. But let's now take a look at some of the happenings that shaped the year 2020. All right, so joining me now to do this review of the year is political affairs analyst Jide Ojo. Of course, he joins us now via Skype from Abuja. Mr. Jide Ojo, thank you very much for joining us on the program. And I should say, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, my sister. It's a pleasure, and we look forward to a better 2021.
Of course. Now, let's get right into it. Now, what is your own personal assessment now of that year in general, 2020?
I did a review in my column in The Punch last week, which was the last week of December 2021, 2020 rather, and I actually highlighted a number of happenings around the four key areas: education, health, security, and economy. So if I'm to start on that four cardinal points, let's take COVID-19 for instance. It was a very challenging year, and the president actually did admit that in his New Year broadcast that it was a very sticky situation, a very dicey one that Nigeria faced. Here is a pandemic none of our leaders, to the best of my knowledge, had ever witnessed. No one had ever witnessed this kind of pandemic. Maybe few Nigerians who have lived up to 100 years or maybe 102 years, because we are told by historians that the last pandemic of this magnitude was in 1918 to 1920. And I don't know how many Nigerians are around then. So here you are. It was just trial by error. We are told even up till now that there is no cure for COVID-19. But then we have people being discharged in hundreds every day. So if there is no cure, how come these people were getting healed and then getting discharged? It was a very tough year, no doubt, but also came with a solution to this pandemic, because by the end of December 2020, we have no less than 5 different vaccines that has been touted as being capable of being an antidote to COVID-19. So we had the Pfizer, Biotech, we have the University of Oxford and Azarenka. We have one developed by the Russian. We have another one by Madagascar, an African country, and a host of others, some of them undergoing clinical trials at different stages now. But if you are going to narrow it to how Nigeria government handled the pandemic, I would say it was a so-so situation because it impacted negatively virtually on everything. As a result of COVID-19, we have to scale down our budget. Almost all the 36 states also have to scale down their budget for 2020. I recall that the president, after signing the 2020 budget in December of 2019, had to reset the budget and scale it down, arising from the fact that we had very low revenue. Our crude oil was no longer being purchased by our partners, and then even taxes could no longer be collected, given the fact that there was shutdown, either technically or shutdown and lockdown in many areas of the economy. Government have to roll out palliative measures, stimulus packages, tax holidays was one of them, social intervention programs like conditional cash transfer, giving people foodstuffs, which was kick-started by the Lagos State government with 200,000 households, and then taken over by federal government. The federal government have to increase the social register by 1 million, from 2.6 million to 3.6 million social register. Then we have people being given food rations, money and then incentive. Some artisans were incentivized. It was also the year when we were told the sustainability plan, economic sustainability plan was rolled out to take over from the economic recovery and growth plan. And that part of the economic sustainability plan was the 75 billion youth intervention program that was meant to incentivize the youth population, given the fact that the economy eventually had to go into recess, largely on account of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, everything, the fallout and the ripple effect of the COVID-19 can be felt in the political, economic, education, aviation, sport, entertainment.
Virtually all sectors, yes.
All sectors of the economy, all sectors of the society was negatively impacted by COVID-19. So Nigeria was a late starter. We didn't impose travel ban early enough. At the end of the day, we have community spread. The president made 3 national broadcasts on COVID-19, but we've been having daily briefing from the presidential task force. So we entered into a lockdown, shutdown. More particularly affected was the following sector: the aviation sector, the sports, the entertainment, the hospitality business, the educational sector. All of these 5 or more were negatively impacted. That they have to. I mean, schools were shut for like 6 months. Aviation sector by about 7-8 months, and then you have even sports. It was only in November, December that you start having contact sports being allowed to take place. So by and large, one thing I must highlight in the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic was the fact that the private sector actually showed the humanity in them by coming up with what they call CACOVID, civil society coalition for the support in combating COVID-19. And they raised over 30 billion, which, as we saw, they used to procure foodstuff, noodles, other foodstuffs like rice and all of that. They purchased these noodles and these foodstuffs and rationed into states. We know some are very tardy in the distribution. And when the NSAS protest came in October, many Nigerians...
Sorry to cut you here, Mr. Ojo, but we'll get to that NSAS part very shortly. But let's also, we'll admit that despite the pandemic and all of the factors of the implications of the pandemic, we still had some quite defining moments in our political space. Let's look at that politics now. How would you say, for instance, our democracy, how did we fare in that past year? And considering that we had 2 elections in Edo State and of course in Ondo State, how would you say we fared in that sense? How was the governance generally?
Well, governance, let's start from politics, election, then governance. In terms of politics, it was the first time the Electoral Management Body, to the best of my knowledge, had to conduct election in a pandemic. If we go back in time in history, our first election in Nigeria was around 1923, when we had NNDP, New Nigeria Democratic Party, led by Abat Macaulay. So by that time, the pandemic of 2018 to 2019 had been overcome. So here we have a pandemic, and then there were scheduled by-elections and off-cycle governorship election, which INEC had to contend with. Several state independent electoral commissions also have to conduct elections during the 2020 pandemic year. And, well, we had those elections, even though, while the INEC did not postpone the off-cycle election in Edo and Ondo, it actually had to shift forward the by-elections in I think 11 or 18 states that was held eventually around November, December last year. But again, what did INEC do? Let's look at INEC had to INEC came up with a new framework for holding election in a pandemic about June last year. After it published that, it received input from civil society, and eventually the INEC last year came up with what they call election viewing portal, election result viewing portal, IREF. That was first thrown in Nasarawa by-elections, Nasarawa Central by-election, and eventually was used during the Edo governorship election and Udo governorship election. That was the first innovation that came last year from INEC. It was also the year 2020 that INEC registered 74 political parties in one fell swoop. That led to a lot of litigations. It was also in 2020 that we had those postponed by-elections eventually holding. And in terms of quality of elections, quite a number of media and accredited election observer groups gave INEC kudos that the Edo and Udo elections actually reflected the wish of the people. Although we must hasten to say that perhaps because of the pandemic, the voter turnout dipped. There wasn't much voter turnout. In fact, the one that was held in December last year, that was it December or November? I can't really say when the by-elections were held. The one for Lagos East senatorial by-election, there was less than 9% voter turnout in that election. And overall, there was generally poor voter turnout. Largely because, one, INEC had very limited voting methods in Nigeria. You have to vote in person. You can't do voting by proxy. There's no mail-in ballot like in US. No early ballot like in Ghana and US. No diaspora voting, and everything had to be like manual. We have not had the privilege of electronic voting, even though INEC last year made attempts and had actually started consultation with over 40 electronic voting machine manufacturing companies. They started getting them to exhibit to it, hoping that very soon the Electoral Act will be amended and that Section 52, which banned it from use of electronic voting machine, will be lifted, and then it will be able to deploy electronic voting solution come 2021. It was also, 2020 was also the year when INEC and civil society largely made frantic attempts to get a new Electoral Act. But that didn't come to pass, even though the Electoral Act amendment, there was a joint committee of Senate and House of Reps that have started consideration of that bill. It's now going to be Electoral Act 2021, but they have, both the House of Reps and the Senate have held public hearing, and we have assurances that as they return from vacation this January, electoral reform will be a top priority that they will engage. But let me recap that in 2020, we have 74 political parties deregistered, leaving us with 18 political parties now. In 20, we have the introduction of election result viewing center, IREF by INEC. INEC also took, in compliance with COVID-19 protocols, everything that has to do with party nomination, accreditation of observers and journalists were done online. And that is the first time they are doing 100% online accreditation, as well as even nomination of candidates. All the political candidates that fielded all the parties that fielded candidates in Edo, Undo, had to submit their nomination online. Unlike before, where they will submit hard copies to INEC committee, ad hoc committee that is put in place in charge. So INEC actually complied with COVID-19 protocols in going online with many of its activities last year. However, and let me also flag the synergy that came out in 2020 between INEC and NCDC. INEC released over 100 of its vehicles to national NCDC, that's National
Center for Disease Control.
Center for Disease Control. Early last year, around April, INEC released 100 of its vehicles for contract tracing and for other logistics that NCDC may need it for. That is a very good collaboration between two agencies of government. I also noted that INEC was also engaged in some civic education, sending SMS to work SMS to people to obey COVID-19 protocols like hand washing, use of face mask, and also use of sanitizer. That was very good. At least it shows that INEC is not just stricto sensu there for election, conduct of elections and all of that, and can also provide some assistance to other sister agencies of government. So I saw that synergy between NCDC and INEC in terms of education, public enlightenment, as well as in logistical support with vehicles. And then when you look at the election, the conduct of the election itself, particularly the campaigns, political parties did not adhere strictly to COVID-19 protocols. We saw the mammoth crowd that were gathering at what level in Edo, in Ondo, as the gladiators campaigned across the different wards and local governments of the state. And I worry so deeply that we have a very highly infectious disease, and yet these politicians, because of their self-interest, were mobilizing mammoth crowds to their campaigns.
And you know, this is actually so sad because it's part of the things that experts have actually attributed to the second wave of the pandemic that we are actually experiencing now. But Mr. Ojo, I'm very sorry to cut you short here. We'll just have to take a very short break here, and when we come back, we'll focus more on other sectors of the economy. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching Analysis on TV 360 Nigeria, and we're still discussing some of the big events that occurred in the year 2020. And of course, I still have on the program Mr. Jide Ojo, a political affairs analyst who joins us via Skype from Abuja. Mr. Ojo, thank you very much for staying with us on the program. And now we've said a lot about the COVID-19 pandemic. We've talked about Nigeria politics in the year 2020. Let's now take a look at the NSAS protest. It was one of, now it will go down in history as one of the biggest protests that have ever been held in Nigeria. Or what do you think, Mr. Ojo? How much of a defining moment was that for us as a country?
Well, it was a defining moment, no doubt. October will remain indelible in my own heart. I got caught up in this NSAS protest as I went on official assignment to Enugu. And while this protest was going on, there was no flights. Flights to Enugu were suspended. I was holed up in the hotel. There was fear that the hotel may be attacked by hoodlums. So it was really a very scary moment for me. So much so that we were at some point contemplating coming back to Abuja by road before graciously the airspace was reopened and flights were resumed. So even though I wasn't directly in terms of being a victim of NSAS, but that was a very scary moment that I witnessed last year. And of course, when you look at the devastating destruction that took place, the number of policemen and women that were murdered in cold blood by some hoodlums in the course of the NSAS, particularly after the initial 2 weeks, which was very largely peaceful, and then we had the rogue elements taking over. Then they start opening up the prisons in Edo and in Ondo. Prisons were thrown open by some hoodlums, and then we start having a spike in terms of arson. Even Lagos witnessed the worst case of the protest because there you had BRT buses, that's mass transit buses, were up in flames, about 300 or thereabout of them. You had courtrooms being burnt. with all the records. In fact, the oldest court in Nigeria, in Lagos, allegedly was burnt, was razed to ashes. We also had situations where warehouses, private and publicly owned warehouses were looted. In fact, it got to a point, if you go, somebody told me if you go to Tinapa today, you will not recognize Tinapa. It was stripped down completely by some hoodlums in Calabar. And don't forget, also, they did same to some politically exposed persons' homes in Ibadan, the house of Senator Folarin. The former Senate leader, his house was vandalized, and vehicles or motorbikes were carted away from his home in the Oluyole estate area of Ibadan. Even the Senator Dome Egba's home in Calabar and several other buildings, private and public, were vandalized. Warehouses were looted, whether they belong to private individuals or they belong to government. There were altercations and big bats, whether those palliatives were ordered or they were there while they were trying to plan the logistics of the distribution. But a lot of buck passing actually took place. But overall, what my own takeaway from that NSAS was the organizing power of Nigerian youth, both organizing power to do good and to do evil. Both of them were demonstrated during that NSAS protest. For the first 2 weeks before the shooting in Lekki, at Lekki toll gate in Lagos, it was largely peaceful, although there were a lot of inconveniences because when they took the protest to blocking the ways to the access road to the airport, that took it a notch higher because then the elites could no longer access the airport. And meanwhile, the roads are totally impassable, arising from insecurity. So it was a very big debacle on the hands of government. So eventually, government had to come in and crush the protest. There is still, the jury is still out whether there was shooting or maiming and killing in Lekki. But across the country, a number of police stations were burnt. A number of policemen and women were murdered. Even individuals, innocent bystanders, there were casualties, and different judicial panel of inquiries have been set up across all the states, some with 3 months mandate, some with 6 months mandate, to unravel the immediate and remote causes of this.
And Mr. Ojo, do you think that these protests have done anything significant to Nigeria's polity now, governance, how we're governed and all of that? Do you think that anything significant has come out of the protests?
Sure. You could hear the president and the IG and security agencies saying they will never allow this kind of protest to hold, given the massive destruction that took place. But more importantly, I think the fact that the president quickly acceded to the 5-point demand of the initial planners and masterminds of the NSAS protest speaks volume. You don't see government usually yielding ground so early in a protest. But here we are, right from the first week of that protest, the moment this protest came off from the social media down to the streets, the presidency quickly acceded to the 5-point demands of ending police brutality, investigating all cases of extrajudicial killings and extortion in police, but disbandment of the disbandment of the SARS squad. And of course, you could see that right from the second week of that protest, the IG formed what it calls SWAT to replace the SARS. But because of the trust deficit that was in government, the trust deficit between the government and the people, many of these youths still continue their protest, even while the government claimed to have acceded to those 5 initial demands. And of course, by the second week of that protest, more demands were being made, aside from the initial 5 that were acceded to by the government. And like I said, this arose as a result of the trust deficit in government officials. And even in the New Year Day broadcast of the president, he did admit, and he still reviewed the situation of the NSAS protesters, where he said those 5-point demands remain sacrosanct, and his government will follow through with the implementation. We wait to see all of that happening, because right now, the judicial panel of inquiry is still sitting. We do not know how much will be eventually earmarked for payment of compensation. Trillions of naira worth of property were destroyed in Lagos, in Abuja, and several other Nigerian major cities. In fact, truth be told, aside from the June 12th protest and maybe about women's riot of 1929, I don't think Nigeria has ever witnessed anything of this magnitude that we saw during the October EndSARS protest.
Oh.
Yeah, and you could see that has caused even disaffection between Nigerian government and the cable news network, that is CNN, over the reportage, as well as even international groups like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the International Criminal Court. You saw the press statement or press address of Alhaji Lai Mohammed was it yesterday or thereabout, where he was lambasting and calling out these international groups as encouraging terrorism in Nigeria because of the way manner in which they have intervened in Nigerian situation. So by and large, for me, the takeaway from the EndSARS protest was the organizing power of Nigerian youth, which should not be underestimated. Because within the 2-3 weeks that this happened, you saw them being able to do crowdfunding of over, was it over 100 million or thereabout? I didn't quite understand. I didn't know the actual amount they claimed to have raised through crowdfunding in just weeks. And this shows the organizational power and skills of these youth, so much so that they even have to hire their own private security to guard them while they were on protest. They had their lawyers, they have doctors taking care of those who are injured. They were replacing vehicles that were vandalized, either allegedly by the police or by hoodlums. And all of this shows the organizing power of Nigerian youth. So for me, that's a very significant takeaway, that we cannot afford to ignore our youth.
Well, Mr. Jide Ojo, we could go on and on. There's so many things to talk about, but this is where we have to just call it a wrap for time's sake. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Jide Ojo, for sharing your thoughts with us on the program. As always very insightful having you on the program, and we hope to have many of you, or more of you rather, in this year 2021. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Please stay safe, and let's take responsibility. COVID-19 is real. We must take responsibility for our personal safety and security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On that note, we've come to the end of this episode of the program. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again next time. I am Oyin Adekunle. Bye for now.